Okay.
So we're good to go.
Yes, sir.
So good morning, everybody. And it's March 17th, Friday, St. Patrick's Day. So it's the last day of the week for us in committee, and it'll been a long week for me working off from Zoom, but hopefully I'll be back next week, and but it's gone fairly well. This morning we have Commissioner Herrick with us, and and Catherine Jensen, is it?
Yes,
Right, and so we're gonna get a
Good response.
well, welcome both of you to the committee. The last week we were in session, I met with Commissioner Herrick in regards to crop damage from animals, and he was expressing concerns in regards to that, and so I suggested that he come before the committee and we would all hear the same story and the same issues, and we'd go from there. So welcome, Commissioner, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Christopher Herrick. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if you bear with me I'll take a personal privilege. It's not often I get to actually testify on St. Patrick's Day. So I'll shout out to my daughter Maeve and my son Connor.
That's great.
I have with me today Catherine Gissing, who is the General Counsel for the department. So if there are any legal questions, you're best to direct them to her, because I would be mixing it up. So we're here today because recently a claim was made against the department to recover costs for damage to crops from deer. This was the first large claim that we've had in many years, first any that I've been aware of, and at least previous 10 years. The combined claims of an eligible wildlife damages have been less than $10,000 over that time, around $9,000. But this one was for 1 year, one farm, and it was substantial. In fact, the amount that we are negotiating, we're still in negotiation, so I have to be careful, but it's about $199,000. So I'll let that sink in for a minute. That's one farm, $200,000.
May I just ask, so that's from deer, you said?
Correct.
Could you just say a little bit more about the situation and
Sure.
just sort of how it
So what I will tell you is when we first got the claim, Catherine and I met and said, we need to look at this and do our due diligence to make sure that everything has been done properly, that this is a legitimate claim.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And it is, because we're still in negotiations, I'm going to be somewhat vague. But
Sure, of course, yeah, you can't talk.
It's an organic farm.
Yeah.
And they had a very detailed list of the damage, and what they would normally get based on previous years. There's a requirement that their income has to be 50% or greater from farming, and it is.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of damage here. And what I will say at the outset is our folks worked with them. They went above and beyond trying to protect the farm. They put up fencing and so on and so forth.
And I think if I may, Mr. Chair, do you mind if I jump in for a sec? For me, as new to the committee, so generally, I'm just trying to understand. So when this happens, this is an insurance issue. Is that what we're talking? No, it's not an insurance issue. It's more of there's some state policy.
So I'm going to get to that,
okay,
Senator.
Great, thank you.
Let me just short circuit my answer by telling you there's a Vermont statute that specifically assigns responsibility to the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Okay,
Okay, and that's why we're here.
that's what, great.
So in reading the statute that allows this claim, which is Title 10, Section 4831, which was passed in 1969, it states, among other things, reimbursement under this subchapter shall be made by the state treasurer on voucher of the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife from money received by the state treasurer under the provisions of this part. In plain speak, this means the Department of Fish and Wildlife will pay this money out of their allocation for this fund, of which there is no such actual allocation. We don't get any money to cover these. It's not in, there's not a line item in the budget. So in this one case, the department has had to find $200,000 to cover the claim. So we made a request to House Appropriations for a one-time $150,000 on leaving funding, leaving us to find the balance of $49,000 from our operating budget. The concern is that this will draw funds away from habitat conservation or other wildlife management activities. And just to remind you that we use a fair amount of our general fund to leverage federal funds on a 25-75%. That's how we acquire most of our. As a result, I'm making a request that the enabling statutes be repealed. Now, I understand that this repeal may be a concern for farmers, and we also make this commitment. We will continue to give technical assistance to those who request it to limit the damage. Our wardens are out there on a regular basis communicating with farmers. But we also propose to increase the number of deer which may be taken by any person when deer are damaging crops, and eliminate the requirement for a farmer to seek a permit to take additional deer and replace it with authorization by staff. I mean, currently you can take up to 4, but after that you need to get a depredation permit from a warden under my authority. And now we're just saying, we're just going to get rid of that process, make it easier for the farmers to handle. I know, for instance, the orchards in the islands have this struggle as well. And so we're trying to balance by we can't control as much as people think. We manage the fish and wildlife. Just as an example, I haven't shot a deer in 10 years.
But you've been trying.
Oh,
That's the.
No, I
make sure that's on the record.
Yes, I take my rifle for a long walk every fall. So we don't actually manage them in that sense, but we have, it's a much more gross motor function in terms of their health and their numbers. And so it seems somewhat unfair for the department to be financially on the hook for something we absolutely can't control. So that is the gist of why we're here. We have the language, and I don't know if Catherine, you want to add to it from a legal standpoint, but we can also just take questions and have a conversation, however you'd like to proceed.
Yep. I think we'll, unless Catherine has something she'd like to add at this point, we'll open it for general discussion. And to have 100, I mean, I can see when this started. Did you say the law was passed in what year, Commissioner?
1969.
Yeah, and in 69, you know, agriculture in Vermont was much different than today. And crops are much different today than they were. But it had to be a pretty expensive crop to have that much damage, I would presume. So I take it that this was not a cornfield or a hay field, or it had to have been some type of crop that was worth quite a lot of money. Could you tell us what that was?
So I can speak to that. Under the statute, the department is required to pay for fruit trees and the produce from that, as well as any kind of crop, and that's very broadly defined. In this case, we were talking about a pretty broad, spectrum of vegetable crops as well as apples. So apple trees and the produce from the apple trees, the apples themselves. And it was a pretty extensive, the fields where this was occurring were pretty large. She has a pretty large operation. The farm has a pretty large operation. So, anything from sweet potatoes to, sort of the mesclun, lettuce mix, carrots, all of those kinds of things were involved in this particular claim. In 1969, I would say that the department was in a slightly different position than it is now. We were much more flush with federal funds, and that's, as sort of hunting and fishing, our fishing kind of licenses have kind of held steady, but the hunting licenses have declined, and so that source of money has been reduced. We really don't have a stream of money that's been allocated for this kind of insurance. So I hope that answered your question.
No, that was quite helpful. Questions from the committee, Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I understand it, there's a twofold request that the existing statute be repealed, which I'm sure we'll hear from farmers a little bit worrisome there, because if we do, and this happens, there has to be somewhere else for them to turn. So that's sort of one thing. And then the other thing, to taking the deer, is it just farmers that you are going to exempt from the 4 deer limit, or I don't understand what the wording is.
You want to talk to the specific
Yeah,
language?
the wording of the statute says a person, so it doesn't identify a farmer. But it does identify the items that are potentially being damaged. So trees that are being grown on a plantation or being cultivated for the purpose of harvesting, some kind of crop, perennial crop, or a marketable item. So that could also be forestry, crop-bearing plants, any crop except grass, so not, hay per se. And then there are some other sections of the statute that deal with livestock. So, but obviously deer are not the type of critter that impact livestock. But if you're talking about bear or certain kinds of fur bearers, there are statutes that allow people to take those animals if they are presenting a threat to their property, their person, or livestock.
So knowing the commissioner as I do, I gotta believe that you thought ahead about that and maybe could give us a solution, or at least a potential fix to the farmer's plight, if you will. In other words, if there's no statute anymore that places responsibility for crop damage with your department, where would a farmer turn? How would we sort of take it off your shoulders, but still allow them some sort of remedy?
So we actually had some conversations about that. And I don't know about whether there's insurance for that, and I have no idea. But then there was a USDA
I
conversation.
can talk
Thank
to that, speak to that a little bit.
See?
We all try to travel with lawyers.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research. I'm not an insurance expert, but there are 2 sources of crop insurance. There's federally funded and there's also a federal statute. There's something called the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, FCIC. And it essentially is, if you look on the USDA website, they have extensive information about that. That is a insurance that guarantees yield. So it basically is a crop insurance that is focused on reimbursing people for yield, lost yield. It's a multi-peril crop insurance. It does cover wildlife. It covers insects. It covers weather events. You know, what I don't know is, because I don't have the experience that a farmer who has maybe perhaps gone and tried to get this insurance, I don't quite know like what that process is, you know. It's based on modeling for past year's production. So, you know, when you take out that insurance, you have to take it out ahead of time. And, you know, there's a like 27-page guidance that kind of explains what it covers. And, you know, what we can do is we can send to the committee assistant the link to that document and provide it to you so you have a little information about what that is. There are also, you know, our Department of Finance does regulate insurance in the state of Vermont. And so there are insurance companies in Vermont that offer the federal insurance. There's a list on a website where you can find who offers that. And then there's state insurance companies around the state that offer insurance. Whether or not, I'm not really sure that the state insurance for me is more of a black box, because I haven't really been able to kind of get, you know, as much information. There isn't as much information like online and available about the state insurance as there is about the federal insurance. So just a little bit of background, but not.
We do have
to all of that.
We do have the director of USDA Farm Services coming in behind you, and we may be able to ask him more info in regards to the federal programs. I don't know if he looks after that or not, but we certainly can pursue that question with John Roberts. So
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Other question, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Do we know what some of our neighboring states do with these situations? New Hampshire and Maine, I'm thinking of in particular, when they've got,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of those big blueberry fields down east and
Yeah.
all that.
I would say that these days it's pretty unusual for state wildlife agencies to be on the hook for wildlife damages.
Okay.
There may be some states out in the Midwest where that's likely, but I when I looked at, say, Ohio and Indiana, I couldn't find anything.
Do you think?
I think that it was more common, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, and I think it was more common at a time when, you know, license sales were really high, and these agencies were more flush with money.
Do you think they're using insurance kinds of things up there?
Probably,
Okay.
yeah. You know, our staff are out there assisting all sorts of people, not just farmers, but, you know, just anybody who calls with a wildlife conflict. And the reason why it's so important for us to do that is that we want the public to support and to appreciate wildlife as opposed to thinking of them as pets and pests, sorry, or pets. We
That's
want,
right.
and we want wildlife to remain wild instead of being acclimated to people. But so we have a pretty extensive, our staff spend quite a bit of time trying to provide people with assistance and helping them out with that. But
To give some texture to that last comment, bear-human conflict last year, we had over 1,300 cases.
Wow. Little Vermont.
Yes, and so when that happens, we have 2 bear biologists in our work. We often go out. And so I spent a day with the secretary last year traveling around just central Vermont, places where bears are problematic with trash, and working with homeowners or property owners on how to prevent that from happening. So that occupies, so we're doing a lot of this work. We spent time on this particular farm and there are other farms where our wardens are out helping them, trying to figure out solutions to this. But I think what we're advocating is there are probably other solutions, but the Department of Fish and Wildlife should not be required to underwrite. We shouldn't be the insurance agent.
Could kill your budget.
Well, that's the other thing,
Huge
it's
situations.
completely unpredictable.
Yeah.
If we had 5 farms next year,
Right.
that's $1 million.
Yeah.
And that's,
But Commissioner, you are in charge of the control though of wildlife, and you do regulate the numbers, I believe, to some degree by allowing hunters to take X number of deer 1 year compared to another year. So you're charged with controlling the wildlife numbers to some degree, right?
that's a fair statement. And we do manage the herd numbers, and that's based on the sustainability of the habitat. And what I will also say is, yes, we're charged with that, but they continue to be, the key term there is wild. They are wildlife. And so it's a bit of a misnomer to say we can manage their actual behavior, but we can manage their health, their herd size.
Yeah.
it's, that's a great point, Senator. I would also say that, when we do that, we're looking at habitat, but what we can't control sometimes is what's the weather like? What's the available food sources out there? Because that fluctuates from year to year. And so we're always kind of maybe a year or 2 behind in terms of trying to make those adjustments and, reduce populations or increase populations so that it matches the habitat carrying capacity.
So let me give a real world example of that. Last year, if anybody spent time in the woods, it was a bad year for mast. We didn't have a lot of acorns. We didn't have a lot of beech. So the food availability was really low. And so wildlife is going to find food. I mean, it's survival. And so that's exactly what Catherine's talking about. So we have no control over that.
Yeah. No, you can control the size, but not where they go.
Right.
And the other question I have you looked into any type of insurance that you folks might be able to have to cover if we left the law the way it is there any type of insurance that you could purchase that would cover your projected losses?
Well, no, I don't think we've done that. And I think that's I'm not sure it's a road I would necessarily want to go down, because really what that turns into is taxpayers underwriting insurance. through us, and we're not insurance people. And so I don't think the department is necessarily, if that's the road we want to take as a state, I don't think we're the best avenue for that. But
Well, we as a state though must buy all types of insurance to cover the liability of our people, our state people that work for us, and you know, I don't know, I would think
so
that they
we're,
would
Senator, we're self-insured.
sell,
Self-insured. There's a risk management office that can speak to that better.
yeah,
And how they underwrite, I can't speak to. But I've been told we are, can you elucidate on that a little bit?
I mean, I've spoken with Rebecca White, who runs the risk management section many times. She, the state is primarily self-insured, but there are some activities for which risk management secures certain kinds of insurance for. And I don't know the details on that, but they are primarily things like construction, high-risk construction, and things like that. So, but if, you know, I certainly can reach out to her. She's very knowledgeable about that kind of stuff and really responsive.
yeah. Yeah, and we could have, you know, we could possibly have her in as well. See, I'm wondering, you know, we talked about when this got put into place, you know, that was back also during a time when commercial Christmas trees started being a very popular thing to do, is have tree plantations and grow, you know, acres and acres of commercial Christmas trees. And so I'm wondering, you know, if the law was put in place maybe back then to help with that, because I know deer and wildlife do quite a lot of damage to Christmas tree crops and you know, eating the ends of the trees. Do you hear much from those folks?
We have not. We had one Christmas tree farm. I believe it was maybe over 20 years ago. It was before my time with the department, that had a fairly large damage claim, and we ended up settling by assisting, well, actually paying for fencing for that farm. But as the commissioner said, in the last, you know, decade prior to 2022, you know, the total amount of everything was less than $10,000. So, you know, we're really not getting these kinds of claims on a regular basis over the last couple of decades.
Yep. Other questions from the committee, Rich?
No, I'm fine, Bobby.
Anything else, Irene?
So very off topic, but there's a bill about building 40,000 houses. Do you ever look at correlation between development and where the wildlife are going and how the wildlife are faring? And because I think we need to look at this holistically, not in a silo.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I would say that the biggest, and this, I'm not going to testify about the housing bill,
Understood.
but I will say this: the largest threat to our wildlife is development. And so we're constantly balancing habitat connectivity with development. We know we need development. I mean, that's just the reality of our time. But how do we do it in a planful way? And so we work a lot of our habitat conservation that we spend these federal funds on is buying wetlands and restoring them, but also keeping habitat from becoming fragmented. And that's important to maintain two things: biodiversity, but also the ability for wildlife in all forms, whether it's plant, insects, birds, and quadrupeds, fur bear, to be able to migrate with changing climate. What may have been a habitat that was fantastic, they might need to move a little bit. But if we cut them off, and they can't do that any longer, there's an area, and we work, and this is a really important thing for you all to know, we work really closely with the Agency of Transportation. And it's a program called Stay Connect, where when they're doing like a great example is out in on Route 15 out along where the Memorial Rail Trail is. I think it's in Peachum. We just recovered a whole bunch of land, but there's a bridge. We planted a bunch of trees for the habitat, but there's a Route 15 overpass. And that's an area where deer cross the road all the time. Well, they built underneath it a bench. It didn't cost AOT a lot of money to do this. But now we have photos of all types of animals crossing under the highway.
That's great.
Exactly. And we do this with aquatic organisms as well. So sizing of culverts. And so there's a cooperative effort. So we don't like put a culvert in and then have us say, we should have made it bigger. We cooperate on the front end. So we do it one time. And an example, I won't tell you where because I can't, they're endangered, but rattlesnakes. We have a highway that bisects two communities of rattlesnakes. And that's not good for the rattlesnake population because they'll become isolated. And so we're working with AOT when they redo this road to make sure people are like, are you kidding me? You're doing this for rattlesnakes? But yes, because rattlesnakes are important to the overall ecosystem. They help control, of all things, Lyme disease.
See, everything comes back to NASA. Everything good in the world comes back to transportation.
Don't tell him that.
Really, he knows that already.
But so the answer to your question is very complex, but our wildlife biologists are constantly balancing what's going on in terms of how do we manage. So another example to what you brought up is why do we have different management techniques for the moose population up in E than the rest of the state?
Yeah.
And it's because of a couple things. One, there are more moose per square mile in that area. We want to have around 1, maybe 0.75 moose per square mile. We also have a winter tick infestation in that area. And so the habitat, the moose are at the right size for their habitat right now in other areas of the state. Up there, there are too many. And so that's why we're trying to manage that down. And those are the really complex things that the really smart people at the department do that I sign off on.
Aren't the ticks managing the moose for you? I've seen pictures of moose that are so emaciated that it doesn't seem like we need human intervention.
So, no.
Okay, good.
And I can have my biologist, but I'll give you the short
I'm glad to
answer.
hear that.
I had to tell, I was up at camp this weekend, and I had to explain it to them. Imagine if this room had ticks in it. If you had 10 moose walk through it, and ticks, by the way, winter ticks aren't like the ones you find on your dog and your cat and you, where you have 1 or 2. They're clustered, hundreds at a time. So a moose walks by and boom, they're loaded with winter ticks. And they spend their whole life cycle on the moose. If 10 moose go through here, 10 moose will have ticks on them. And then if each moose has 5,000 ticks, what's that work out to?
1,000 ticks.
50,000.
50,000 ticks now survive. If we have 5 moose go through, we've cut that in half. If cut the number of ticks down. So over time, we're driving the population of ticks down. Here's the danger. Right now, we're seeing the damage done by the winter ticks. This is really gross, but it's true. They take their last blood meal just before the calves are calved. And so we see a huge reduction in calf weight. So they have poor survivability. So they may not have ticks on them, but they don't survive because they're weak and they're underweight and they can't survive. The cow may not survive either. And so the goal here is not numbers, but healthy. And so by bringing the number down, we reduce the impact over time of the ticks on the moose herd's health. And that's the long-term goal. And it takes a long time. We're doing this in conjunction with New Hampshire, Maine, and now Quebec is getting involved. It seems counterintuitive, but it absolutely makes sense. And if you at some point want to have Nick Fortin in, he can explain it way better than I just did. And I can also send you our moose report so you have it, and maybe we'll send that over to you. But thanks for the question.
That's a great question. And so the commissioner's given you some good examples, but we have a really active land acquisition program. And we work with the Department of Forest and Parks within the Agency of Natural Resources to identify those areas where there are larger blocks of conserved lands, which we're trying to connect them, not only on a Vermont landscape scale, but on a Northeast landscape scale. So into Canada, into New Hampshire, into towards New York and the Adirondacks, so that wildlife can persist on the landscape, for our children and grandchildren. The other sort of example that I think is important is that we participate in certain regulatory processes to protect wildlife habitat and aquatic resources. And then we have a really active landowner and municipal outreach program where we try to assist municipalities with model, plans and zoning regulations, as well as just strategies to try to, keep habitat healthy and connected. So,
I'm wondering when there's a solar array going in or wind turbines going in, do they usually get you folks in to speak in regards to that loss of property for our wildlife to eat and roam on?
Yeah, we are a statutory party to the Public Utility Commission. And there's a standard that says that there can be no undue adverse impact to the natural environment. And so we participate in those proceedings and an attempt to protect wildlife habitat. Sometimes it means that we come to a compromise with the developer and we conserve, habitat nearby. Sometimes it means that we require them to change their project. And sometimes it means that we say, well, you can't build it. So it runs the gamut.
Well, why I asked the question is the commissioner brought up the moose population in Eden, Vermont. And as we all know, in Lowell, Vermont, they put 21 wind turbines up on the ridge of mountains that divide the eastern part to the western part of Orleans County. And I bet a lot of those moose and wildlife came from because of all that construction up there on the mountain in Lowell. They had to go somewhere. and they went south and ended up in Eden. But I know as communities build out, it is much higher life when we had our villages and people pretty much lived there.
Yeah.
Other questions for the commissioner?
I've got one, Bobby.
Yeah,
So the world's a lot different than it was in '69. And in '69, this was pretty much rural farm place. And today, it's a very different population. And as you talk about managing populations and buying land and controlling population numbers to be able to do this. But there's really what I see, a population that doesn't understand any of that. It doesn't understand the nature of all of that. And in some respects, you're losing the public relations battle around any of that control. And if you don't have that control, if I'm a farmer and you overrun by that, my cornfield's getting flattened. So in this, some of it is what are you doing to step up your efforts versus what you've done in the past to make the public understand what you need for tools to control. Because I don't see you as proactive in that respect to the level that I think you need to be.
So I appreciate your comment. I will tell you that the biggest thing hurting us is this thing right here, video games and TV. When I was a kid, I didn't sit around and play on my phone because I didn't have one. The phone I had, you did this. But I was out, my mom would say, get outside. And so we're competing with that. But I will say our outreach program is probably one of the best in state government. We're doing a lot of work with New American population, teaching them how to fish. Folks will come in. Allie Thomas does a lot of this work. Nicole Meyer. We'll get a bunch of people, they work Perkins Pier, and they leave there with fishing tackle and a fishing pole, and they know how to fish. And I think it's an uphill battle, no doubt about it. And we're trying to do the best we can. I would be open to suggestions on how we could up that game, because I frankly think that our outreach folks do a tremendous job. But again, I think we're like the salmon running up the stream. It's an uphill battle. It's up waterfall right now because there's some factors we can't control.
My comment to that is that we're becoming more of urban or suburban population living in a rural setting.
Correct.
And the understanding that between somebody that grew up in a rural place, in a rural, and it's not that anybody's bad, it's just, it's a whole different viewpoint. And, the outreach, I think, is less than it needs to be.
Well, I certainly will see what we can do about that, but I also will say that I think when it comes to hunting activities, I find, and this is a sample size of one, but I happen to get a lot of information because of my position. In this world where we're preaching tolerance all the time, there's not tolerance when it comes to hunting. People are demonized for doing something that is good for them, and that is part of the struggle we have. But we will certainly continue to try to raise the bar.
So I'll just add my own thoughts here. To get back to the matter at hand. I think we have a problem. I think we need to find a solution and take it off your shoulders, whether that's with some insurance program or whatever else we can do. I'm curious, we've gone 10 years with relatively little. Is it because people don't know about it? Or I can't imagine that a farmer every year doesn't lose something to a deer. Maybe it doesn't reach a level where they want to do anything about it. And I don't know how much publicity this case has had, but to me, that probably means you might be hearing from a few more folks in the future. So I think time is of the essence in terms of fixing it, however we figure on doing that. But I understand the problem, and I think it's up to us to figure out how to fix it.
Commissioner, have you folks talked at all about capping out the insurance payment at a certain level, so that, if you did have a crop loss, you would only get a max of so much, like other insurances. Many other insurances have caps and limits on how much you can draw.
No, honestly, we haven't had that discussion, but, that's certainly a consideration. I would mention that if the cap was 20,000 and we had 6 cases, that's still a lot of money. And one of it's the variability of this that makes me very nervous as a business manager. Not being able to predict the cost to the department every year when we build our budget, it's pretty fine margins. And this is just an outlier. And so that's certainly a consideration. But that's the risk that I see in going in that direction.
Yeah. And the other issue that I've heard of or did earlier this year was some farmers were losing a lot of acreage to bear going in their cornfields and eating some corn, but then what they call rolling in their cornfields and flattening the corn down. Did you hear any comments from agriculture in regards to that happening?
I'm going to turn it to Catherine in a minute. I haven't heard any comments from ag, but I've witnessed it where I hunt up in the island, up in Canaan.
Yeah. We've actually, our warden staff have been out in the field in the last couple of years with several farmers who are experiencing those issues. And the statutes do not, oddly enough, require the department to pay damages for bear crop damage. So, yeah. So, but we have been assisting those farmers. Unfortunately, those farmers have also become, sometimes they are targets because of this changing, sort of culture that we have in Vermont. And, so I would say it's mostly about social media. I do, yeah, so I don't know if I've answered your question, but.
Well, there's
definitely an issue that we're aware of, and we've had staff assisting various farmers with that.
Yeah. Other questions from committee members? Irene?
I was just really struck by Senator Westman's comment because you use the word population in many different ways in the sentence without clarifying it at first. And as I was deciphering it, I realized you were first talking about controlling the wildlife populations, and then you mentioned population, and I think you meant people. And I just, coming from a rural district, I'm just leaning toward we control the people population. We find ways for the wildlife that were here first to have their corridors, and we as people concentrate on focusing how to keep people in line. Just saying. think out of the box a little maybe, but.
I will say that we do surveys about our department and about people's attitudes towards wildlife. And we hire a PhD organization that has done surveys for wildlife organizations across the United States. Very knowledgeable, extremely, has a lot of expertise in that. And we have very high rates of credibility. And so I feel
Who has the credit?
our
Your
department
department,
has
got it.
very high
Yep.
rates of credibility, and there's very high rates of support for the things that we regulate, including, hunting, fishing, and trafficking. But there's also a very loud, what I consider to be a minority population that is very sophisticated and is lobbying for changes. And so people hear them and they think, okay, that must be a majority votes. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think that the surveys that we've conducted demonstrate that it's not the case. So, I agree with you. We do need to continue to step up our game and do the outreach that we need to do.
Other questions? I think you folks have certainly laid out the issue from your side, having to cover this damage. And we'll get some other folks in. Certainly want to hear from like FDR and those folks to see what type of coverage that there is out there. If we decide to discontinue this at your level, where do the farmers go to get coverage, and is there such a thing available? So if there are no other questions for Catherine or
You better feed Bum Bum.
Yeah, Bum Bums needs either a little pat or a little feeding.
well,
Yeah.
Bum Bum's worried about her insurance. Yeah, between her and the dog, I don't know. Well,
Thank you for your time, and if there's anything else you need from us, I think you know how to get a hold of us.
yeah,
I will send some materials to you.
I'll pass it on.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great
Thanks
day.
very much.
Yeah, thank you both. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you, folks.
Thank you.
So, maybe, Linda, maybe, next week, we could, have Rebecca White in, to chat with her in regards to the risk management stuff that they do. And certainly, the ag agency must have somebody that takes complaints from crop damage, and we could get, if there is somebody over there that looks after that part, maybe we could get somebody from the agency as well as from the is it the Department of Financial Regulations. I don't know if Rebecca White is from there or not, but get somebody from Financial Regulations and Insurance to see what they if they know anything about crop damage and stuff. Is there? We can ask John Roberts. We're having him in regards to the organic issue, but we can ask him if he knows anything in regards to federal insurance for animal damage. Anyone else that you folks can think of that we should try to get in? We have some time next, is it next Friday? Well,
So, on this issue, Bobby, would it be helpful if our staff asked somebody at NCSL or CSG, one of the national organizations, and found a little survey about what other states do? You know, because they brushed up against it here, but they didn't really, I get no sense of what in other states do across the country in total.
Great idea.
yeah, good suggestion. Linda, is there someone, maybe even Michael would do a little research, or he'd have somebody in the council, his aide, do some research on that and come back with a report.
Yeah, I'll check on that.
Yeah, I think just, an email off to NCSL, somebody must deal with that.
What time can John come, Linda?
He's coming at 10:30.
Pardon?
He's going to be with you by Zoom from 10:30 to 11.
Yeah. Have you folks got, have anything that you'd like to add to next week's schedule, Irene?
So I'm just gonna throw this out because I'm too new to know that this isn't germane. I was at the Vermont Garden Show recently, and it was fabulous as always. And I ran into somebody from the Lewis Creek Association who's been a nursery person her whole life. And a couple of the nursery folks put their heads together and they were like, oh, you're on ag. They don't do anything for us, but apparently they're regulated by the ag agency.
And
Unbeknownst to me. So I didn't know if we wanted to hear from nursery folks for any reason about their gripes about the agency of ag, or if that's not even like where we should go. But that's just a group that feels that they sort of do ag, but no one ever hears their voices. Anyway, for what that's worth, that's the feedback I got from several people.
Do they have a point person that would come?
There's somebody who would come. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I just throwing that out there. I don't know if you hear from nursery folks ever, or if that's just way outside of the stuff we would ever.
I know we have dealt with them in the past in regards to hoop houses. We dealt a lot with the Conant family. I think they own, one of the boys owns Clausen's up in, maybe in your district.
Not my district, but Maz's district. Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know, I'm just trying to remember. I know he and his wife, who I believe passed a few years ago, the Conant boy, his mother used to be in the legislature with us.
Oh, really?
Warrior.
Yeah.
Good Conan.
And I know we dealt with those issues in the past. We haven't recently, and certainly since you've been with us, Irene, dealt with any of those, but it would be good to have those folks in if they'd like. Maybe we should get a little preview from the agency first to find out if they help out and what they do for the for that industry, because that's really a pretty big industry, around Vermont.
Well, at least when you go to the flower show, it seems like it, but again, I didn't know if they plugged into what we do at all or not, so thank you, that's a good start.
Hey, Bob,
Yes,
I wonder, I'll check in with the House side on universal meals. Like we probably end up, as we talked about, it'll likely come to Ed, but there might be something that we need to pull apart next week in committee, and I'll just let you know if there's anything on our side. But if we have 15 or 20 minutes, that could be good just setting aside if you're okay with it.
well, definitely, and we wanna make sure we get all of our ducks in a row on that
Yep.
particular issue, or we'll get it handed to us in our
Yep.
hand.
So I'll write to, I think it's coming out of David Durfee's committee, and I think it might have gone to Ed. So I'll touch base with the chair of Ed and see what they're doing with it.
Yeah, because Kate really made a big difference on that
Yeah,
issue last trip around, and of
Yeah.
course she wasn't there, so that would, I think, that's one of the most important issues we've got ahead of us, besides our organic deal and a few other issues.
Thank you.
So, if you folks, I know it's a little bit early, but if you want to take a break,
that'd be great.
uh,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you.
and then we can get started, because we only got really a full half hour with John. We'll try to get started maybe a little bit early.
Okay.
So we try to get John at, say, 25 after.